I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. Bill, there's a guy named Marc Thiessen. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, and he's a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, also a columnist for the Washington Post. And writing for FoxNews.com, he says that Donald Trump could be the most honest president in modern history. And here's what he means. It's not that Trump doesn't lie. Yeah, he lies. He exaggerates. He brags. He says things that aren't true. He doesn't do careful research. He shoots from the hip. However, Marc Thiessen says that where it matters, Trump has told the truth. In other words, he's actually doing what he said he would do during the campaign. He actually cuts taxes. He kills terrorists. He makes better trade deals. He reduces regulations. Therefore, Trump is honest where it counts, says Marc Thiessen. Bill, you've said that Trump's tweeting and his careless speech are part of the price that we're willing to pay to get the results he delivers. Are you entirely comfortable with Thiessen's thesis here?
You know, I hadn't really thought about it, Scott, but I think not only am I comfortable with the thesis, I'll enlarge on it. It's pretty well known, I think, and I think even the most ardent Trump supporters know, and in a weird sort of way kind of admire, the fact that the president will basically speak out on whatever he wants to, how he wants to, on Twitter immediately. Sometimes that creates some embarrassing tweaks, and other times it creates absolute masterpieces. But I was thinking about what you were saying about his honesty when you were talking about that, and the guy's point was that he's maybe the most honest president in history in terms of what he delivered on the campaign speeches and promises. But I think it's actually much deeper than that. Since Donald Trump essentially has no check valve between his mind and his fingers on Twitter, you get to hear what he's thinking. Pretty much, I bet within a few minutes or even seconds of what he's thinking. And so what he's doing is he's actually honestly in a very, and I mean this as a great compliment, in a very almost kind of an innocent way, he's using Twitter to bypass the mainstream media. That's a political thing. But he's telling America how he feels about things in real time. Now, needless to say, a lot of people don't like what he's feeling, and a lot of people are a little embarrassed by what he's feeling, but you get the guy's actual gut response, and you get it in real time. We saw this when he criticized Dr. Blasey Ford. And his instincts for people are superb, unmatched, I think, certainly of any modern politician I've seen. He's the antithesis of Hillary Clinton in this regard. He knows people, he knows how they work, and he has a good feel for an audience and a good feel for the moment. So not only would I agree about the keeping his campaign promises part of the honesty, but I'd add further that he is transparently honest, going directly to the American people. And let me just contrast this with another president. Let's just pick one at random and say, Barack Obama.
I had no idea who you were going to pick.
Yeah, I thought you might. So you remember, we hear stories about Barack Obama saying that he's the best speechwriter of all his speechwriters. He's the best campaign manager of all his campaign managers. He's the best diplomat of all his diplomats. And then he said he could play on a level in the NBA like LeBron James. And he meant these things. But he didn't say these things directly to the American people. These were egotistical, ridiculous fantasies that he had and could not be disabused of. So while Donald Trump may be putting more of his faults and maybe a little bit of his egomaniacism out there, and you can't be president of the United States, you can't go through this procedure like Washington did anymore. You've got to be a complete egomaniac to buck the system. That's why Kanye West is the only guy in the entire world with the courage to stand up against the left, because Kanye West's ego is larger than the known universe. But what I'm trying to say is that people like Obama and all the rest of them, God knows all the things that Bill Clinton was actually doing in the White House when Donald Trump is tweeting about how he feels. I think it's a really interesting case.
Well, you know, what you just said about Twitter specifically brought to mind, I believe, a quote that I attribute to Ralph Waldo Emerson. I could be wrong on the attribution there. But essentially, he said...
What did Emerson have to say about Twitter?
He did. In his day, Twitter took a lot longer. But what he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, is speak what you believe today in words as hard as cannonballs, and if on the morrow you should think differently, speak that too. Is that what we're getting from Trump?
I think so. I absolutely think so. I haven't seen offhand, I can't think of too many cases where Trump has reversed himself and said I'm wrong, but it's probably not in Trump's nature to say I'm wrong. And so you may have a position on one thing, and then a few months later you may have a statement on the other thing, and if you're asked about the contradiction, you probably just ignore it. Part of that inability, I think, to kind of fess up to things is part of the political nature, and I think it's part of very successful people. But I think in Trump's case specifically, we have to remember the I almost did it. You know what I almost did? I almost said the social milieu that Trump grew up in.
We do have viewers in France.
I did stop myself. I'd like that to be noted on my permanent record. No, we got to think about the gang of people that Trump has hung out with pretty much his entire life. You're talking about real estate developers in New York City and business tycoons in New York City and very, very high stakes games of poker for hundreds of millions of dollars, where any admission of weakness has just cost you $50 million or something along those lines.
I had a friend who was in prison who told me that he didn't want to get in fist fights, but he said, in here you can't show a moment of weakness.
No. Just as a small parenthetical for those members of our audience who haven't been arrested yet, and I'm one of them, but I'm sure if Hillary has her way, that time will be coming. It's pretty much standard advice from people, especially people who are not terribly hardened people, that when they go to jail or prison, if somebody says, "Hey man, I want to, give me a cigarette," you say no, and if he insists, the advice I was given by a street kid who I got to know pretty well, said, if he starts giving you, if he won't take no for an answer, you need to jump up, walk over there and punch him in the face. And if you get hit a couple times, okay, but you're not going to get hit again. And this is the sad reality of human nature. And by the way, it's an interesting tangent, which is really should be what my entire, that's my life story.
That's the title of your autobiography.
Yeah, an interesting tangent, the Bill Whittle story. But it is a function of understanding how the world works, not how the world we would like it to work. You often see these or hear these stories of just take progressives for example. And they find themselves locked up in prison, and the first thing they try and do is just say, hey man, I'm really solid, with the Black Lives Matter movement, and just want you to know I got your back, bro. And the people in there find this reprehensible and rightfully so. If you want to prepare, if you want peace, prepare for war.
The 2020 presidential election is going to play out with the Democrats branding Trump as the liar in chief, and President Trump essentially running on promises kept. But Bill, what does this say about the so-called party of values, the Republican Party, when they're willing to bow to situational ethics, in effect, and say, I like the results I'm getting, I'm willing to overlook, as Mitch McConnell and Mitt Romney have said recently, I'm willing to overlook the peccadillos of his personal problems.
This is not situational ethics. I've never, ever been an advocate or a believer in situational ethics. I am, however, a very strong believer in the idea of having an ethical code that understands that different adversaries playing by different rules deserve different responses. That's not a question of lowering my standards or lowering my ethics. It's understanding that if I'm in a dirty fight with dirty players, I have the choice of either fighting fair and losing or fighting dirty and beating them. And I don't see any advantage to losing if you're the person with morality, because the person who ends up winning is the person with no morality at all. In other words, in the famous words of Abraham Lincoln, I'd rather bend the Constitution. I bent the Constitution, so I had to break. So I couldn't, so didn't have to break it. We see in Donald Trump a person who understands, for the first time in modern history, he's the first Republican, absolutely the first Republican, who understands how the system works now, which is a world of which is a world born out of monolithic liberal opinions in places like CBS, ABC, and NBC, because that's all there was. And when we had those three networks, we didn't realize the bias that was built into the news that we have. Now we're in a world of instantaneous communication. We're in a world of personal assassination, and we're in a world of increasing polarization. All of these things are generally not good. But the thing about Twitter is, and the reason that he's so heavily criticized for his tweets, is because not only does it allow him to say what's on his mind right away, and I think you could certainly make the case that it would be prudent to be a little more. Let a
Circumspect.
little more time go by before you punch the tweet button, which is why I'm never on Twitter, by the way, ever, because it makes me angry. And so I don't ever tweet, ever. I have automatic tweets of what I post, and I don't get into this game at all. But he does. And so I don't see it as situational ethics, Scott, to adapt your tactics to meet the tactics of the enemy you happen to be fighting. And the tactics of the enemy that we've been fighting is low and base. And it's not just a he said, she said, you know. The entire purpose of the left has been to accuse conservatives of racism, Nazism, homophobia. You know, we're just what aren't we? And Donald Trump throws it back. And I'll close with this: the perfect example, I thought, of all the things I've seen Donald Trump do, the most masterful thing he ever did, by far for me, the one that I realized, no, this guy's an actual genius when he comes to understanding how the game works today, was, I want to say it was the second debate. And I was waiting, and so were you, and so was everybody else, for Hillary to start with this war on women thing, the Republican war on women. This was going to be what won her the election, was going to be convincing women that Republicans hated women and that Republicans wanted to put women back in the kitchen barefoot and pregnant, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And here comes the war on women. I could see it coming. And Donald Trump had the genius to put 4 or 5 of Bill Clinton's assault victims in the front row. And by doing that, by putting them right there, and everybody's seen that picture of Bill Clinton looking over at them, right? You know that picture? The genius of it was to say, if you want to go to the gender thing, Hillary, here's my opening pitch. And I was just flabbergasted at not only how brilliant it was as a tactical move, but how effective that it was. The Republican war on women did not come up during 2016, and this was Hillary's trump card, if you'll pardon the expression, and she couldn't play it because Trump understood this game better than she did. And
well, the rapid nature of
what's that?
Go ahead. I was going to say that the rapid nature of communications in this age has demanded that we produce this daily program here. And you were going to add something else.
I was just going to say, yeah, it's not a question of the rapidity of the message. It's a question of optics. I heard that sometimes you hear terms like virtue signaling or optics, and you never heard them applied before, but boom, get it. Optics is how does this look? You know, it used to be things like decorum would be another word for optics, but Trump understands optics in a reflexive and visceral way. As a man who's deeply concerned about his own image, he understands optics. And since we get so much of our information visually and in tiny little bites, controlling the optics is controlling the message. And while Donald Trump may not be controlling the message, he's certainly in the game and not leaving the entire field to these progressives.
Well, we don't control the message here, but we do get the message out, and that's thanks to our members at BillWhittle.com who make it possible for us to produce and disseminate most of what we do at BillWhittle.com freely across the country and around the world. And the people who are contributing $9.95 a month to that effort do so not because of what they can get, but because of what they can give. And we are forever grateful for that. It has made it possible for us to do something we love to do. And we know that it's not always that you want to be able to pick a fight at the water cooler and know what to say. But sometimes it's good just to hear your thoughts expressed in a way that is cogent and pungent and has a story behind it that will connect with other people. So if you can't say what Bill Whittle is saying, you can share the video that Bill Whittle does, which we provide for free, thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Bill Whittle Now possible.